Welcome to Between Product and Partnerships, a podcast focused on bringing together product, partnership, and engineering leaders to discuss how to build, support, and scale SaaS ecosystems. This podcast is presented by Pandium, an integration platform for building native integrations.
Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for listening to our podcast or watching this video, Between Product and Partnerships, where we talk about the challenges and what it takes to build integrations, partnerships, and SaaS platforms. And today, I'm so excited to talk to Scott Lavery, who is the Senior Product Manager at Arkestro. We've chatted a bunch over the years. You are a man after my heart when it comes to integration work. So maybe if you want to share a little bit with the audience about your background, we can get started.
Sure. Yes, we have talked quite a bit over the years. Well, hey, everybody. As Christina mentioned, I'm Scott. I'm a senior product manager currently at Arkestro. So I have been in procurement for about 4 years, but I have a storied history spanning about a decade in B2B SaaS. And I found myself in the integration space quite a bit, spanning martech, wealth management, and now procurement. So got to see a lot of different things.
Yeah, so maybe we could start there. Like, I have my own story about how I kept going back to integration work, but I guess maybe if you want to share a little bit with the audience about, like, when you started at companies, do you start to do integrations? Are you finding your way there? How did you get started doing that? Why do you hate yourself like I do when it comes to making a career out of this? No, you probably don't. But yeah, just give us a story. Tell us a story.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I don't think, at least me personally, I never signed up to really be the integration PM. I know there are roles out there. I feel like for maybe most folks, you kind of fall into it. And I feel like it's by virtue of integrations become a priority. At some point in a company's life cycle, you start to realize, man, these are really high value. We need to incorporate for whatever reason. Maybe it's to make a key account happy, or maybe you've realized stickiness or retention is tied to integration, or whatever the case might be for why. They end up coming up, and they end up, generally speaking, getting shoehorned into an existing team. So like for me, I was overseeing, at a company, we did largely like CRM work and some marketing automation. I was overseeing the API. So we had an API offering for customers who wanted to take it to the next level with us in terms of, data in, data out. Let's make some seamless kind of workflows. But we started getting more and more of an appetite of like, we want more turnkey or touchless stuff. And that's where it sort of turned from, we're maintaining this productized API to like, we need something more for our customers to really get the most out of, being partners with us. And so that's kind of how it happens. I think everyone wants more for less. And so you have your roadmap, and it kind of is like this whole new thing that we don't want to disrupt our roadmap, but we also need all this stuff for free, basically, is kind of the mentality, I think. And that's how you fall into the trap that we'll probably talk about in a bit, which is different solutions to that problem that maybe aren't always solutions in the long term.
Yeah, 100%. And we will definitely get to that. But zooming out a little bit, because you've had the experience of doing like general kind of product management, feature management, and also integration work, how would you say the skill sets sort of differ, or the jobs differ when you're working on integrations versus working on core product?
Oh, that is a tough question. I would say you have to throw a lot of what traditional product management, some of the core tenets of it, out the window. So like, it depends on what kind of integration you're working on and what the platforms are that you're syncing with and things like that, and what the nature of the integration is doing. But like typically, the way I think about integrations is like a core product manager, you're probably interested in metrics like daily active users, engagement with features, things like that. Whereas on the integration side, it's actually almost the complete opposite. I'm thinking in terms of like, I want my customers to set this thing up once and never think about it again. It should kind of just work. So like, it's almost the antithesis of what you typically think of as a product manager, which is you kind of just want this set it and forget it mentality, and you want turnkey, quick setup, minimal amount of work. It should just do the thing. So that right there, like everything that branches from that, I feel like that's the core difference to me. Of course, there's things like oftentimes integrations are less UI centric, depending on what you're doing. So it's a lot more back-endy thinking in terms of like data models and moving data around and shifting things and business logic, as opposed to, maybe you're working on a nice pretty mock in Figma and there's, a whole core UI component to this nice feature you're building. But I think that's kind of the core thing is like you're almost flipping the script on what it means to be a product manager, in a lot of ways. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
totally a
interesting.
different way of thinking.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I can tell that you've done this for a long time because that is something that I bring up a lot too, and that I think gets missed, which is like the daily active user metric is different because it's not necessarily them interacting with that part of the product, right? Like for us, being an integration platform, we think about like, are the syncs running? Like, how frequently are they running? Are are they running correctly? Obviously, but you can't even really measure like the frequency of syncs. That's not even necessarily a proxy for success, right? Like we have companies that work in environments where they do things around payroll runs. So like those syncs might only run once a week or once a month at the end, right before payroll, right after payroll. And that
Right.
is as valuable to them as if it was running every 5 minutes. And they might have others that run every 5 minutes and are not valuable at all. Like they're doing these little discrete things that like, sure, it's fine, but like that's not um, a high
Yes.
value usage pattern to them. So really, I agree with you. It takes like there's some nuance there and like what success looks like. And even measuring number of records is not necessarily it, or the volume of data is not necessarily it.
That could even point to a problem. Number of records could be that could surface an issue, not so much a adoption. A green light could surface a red light. But like you said, it's extremely contextual. Some integrations are near real time and need to be near real time. Some are, I've worked on some things that sync once a month, and that's okay. And all the metrics are contextual to that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I think about how integration work has a lot more dependencies oftentimes than core feature work. Like that's not necessarily the case if you're working on a giant system that's been around a really long time, then you're really operating within the confines of that system. But if you think of
Mhm.
like smaller software companies, and by smaller I mean like sub 20,000 people, like you're kind of greenfield in a lot of ways still as a PM. Like you're operating on a thesis, but you're building something more or less from scratch. When you do integration work, it's like you have dependencies on all sides. You've got the dependency of your own system, what it does, the technology dependency of your own system, what it can support, the APIs, all that, plus this third party thing that you have no control over at all. Like you have no idea
Totally.
what they're doing. I wonder how you think about those dependencies from like a um a technology perspective, but also thinking about like what those tools do and how you think about learning the usage patterns and I guess like benchmarking or finding that sweet spot of like understanding how your customers use HubSpot, but not needing to be an absolute expert in HubSpot. And I think there is a sweet spot there, right?
Yeah. You bring up an excellent point about maybe a core difference between core PM work and being an integration PM is I think an integration PM you also have to understand not just where you sit in the ecosystem, but you get a much better feel for the landscape of like the supporting players in your story that you're telling. So like an example is when I worked in martech, we knew where we sat against our competitors, but you also got a feel for as I was getting into more of the integration requests that customers were having, you get to know a lot of like ancillary platforms. Like, okay, like Shopify's big. So like, okay, we need to integrate with Shopify and you learn about their business a little bit and how your customers are interacting with both of your systems together and they want your systems to talk to each other. So you really get a feel for the entire ecosystem of an industry, not just where you sit in the scheme of things. So it is interesting. And like you said, there are a lot of third party dependencies. Sometimes you might feel a little helpless because what you're working on might be out of your control for a little while. This is contingent on, you know, this third party updating their API to do what I need it to do or whatever it might be. So yeah, there's a lot of that too.
Yeah, I find doing this work for a long time that like this is my personal opinion. Folks are looking for a shortcut to that like having to learn the other system thing or like having to learn the general usage patterns of the other thing. Like, you don't need to be deep, like NetSuite admin to like build an integration, but like you got to know what your customers are doing roughly to be able to build your
Yes.
first version, right? And I think there's a lot of software out there today too that like kind of tries to fake the funk that like you don't have to know any of that. Like we can handle all that for you. And I'm like, sure.
Hmm.
Like you maybe they can kind of obfuscate away like the complexity of a specific customer object in a specific system, like, you know, whatever the data hygiene is to go into those specific fields. But I don't think that that removes the necessity to understand how that object is used, right? And in my experience, when I've walked into companies that have built integrations, and inevitably I've done that at most of my jobs, there's been like a handful of them kicking around that were built by somebody that didn't actually know how the external systems worked. The CX team ends up figuring it out because they have to, because somebody calls and is like, I don't know how this thing is functioning. And
Yeah.
inevitably, oftentimes it's not well documented. And like, there's an API endpoint documented, but like, what does that mean? Um, so yeah, I wonder, like, just your own personal opinion, if you think there's like a way, if there is a way around that, or if it's just like you got to just like do the work and get in there and like learn how Salesforce works, like.
I think that is such an interesting observation, and it's so true. Um, when you're looking at, let's say you're looking at an example that comes to mind to me is NetSuite. I was building a NetSuite integration one time, and you're looking at the API documentation, and you're assuming that these certain objects or these things do and are used in a certain way, given what they're called and given kind of what you understand about, whatever it is you're building for, accounting or, FP&A. And when you talk to actual customers, you often realize those were like idealistic pie in the sky. Like that's not how it works in the real world, Scott, That's kind of the gist I got was like, yeah, it'd be great if like we all put our if everyone used this GL code for this and the way that it's documented, but that's not how it works in the real world. Like here's what we really do. And so I think that's such an interesting observation. And the only way that I found to get around that is one, talk to a lot of customers. Of course, it's cliche, but like do that. And two, a route that I've gone in the past is bring in a consultant. If you're really not sure, like pay somebody who has done 100 implementations of this with customers in your space and see what they would think about how you're thinking about doing this integration, because it's worth the money. It's better to do that than build the wrong thing. It's a lot cheaper in the long run, and you don't lose trust with your customers. So it's a really tough problem though, because you're right. Customers don't always use software in the way that you would expect, and you need to get to the bottom of that when you're seeing how it's going to play in the real world.
Yeah, and it's funny too because there's like an additional layer of complexity with consultants, and I agree with you. I especially think for folks that have done like a lot of implementations, like that is worth so much because they've seen the patterns, they've like seen the different industries, they've gone through this, and they have the best practice. Like it's so dangerous when you're working with a large system like an ERP, like NetSuite, when you model an entire integration after one customer, because there are entire industries of consultants. Like there's billions of dollars flowing into consultants to implement these tools, and they're incentivized not to necessarily do it with the best practice in mind, right? So like I've worked with companies, great big companies,
Mhm.
places that people shop that you've been to, that like have rebuilt their ERP in such a way that like it is so far from any standard anyone has ever seen, because somebody got real creative in the beginning and then they just kept going and going. And like if you build
Yep.
your whole NetSuite integration around that thing, you're never going to be able to reuse it. So I think having that trips to the plate, like if you, Scott, haven't seen 5 NetSuite implementations yourself, finding someone that has, not going with like your largest customer and just trusting them, is like so
Right.
super important and will save you like so many cycles of iteration in the future.
So many headaches that could be avoided. Just get a whatever you determine is statistically significant subset of your customers. Don't just talk to the loudest ones or the ones requesting the feature. Don't just go to them and ask them how they want it built, because I almost guarantee you they have some custom flavor that's probably not. If there is an industry standard in the platform, they're probably not using it. And I question if there even really is, because I've seen so many different flavors of different platforms. So yeah.
Yeah, I find this stuff to be fun, right? Like some of like exactly what we're describing, the sort of weird esoteric nuances of these different systems and seeing how people use them. But I could absolutely see how this would not be fun for people, like some
Yeah.
people don't care about how your 10 different customers are using NetSuite. But again, I think like to do the integration work and to enjoy it, you have to be a special kind of person, like myself. And I think like you, with that in mind,
Yeah.
I know we've talked in the past about you've come into companies that have existing integrations. Maybe they're okay, maybe they're not. Can you describe like what a typical sort of messy environment for integration looks like to you at a company and like why you think companies get into this scenario? Because I can definitely talk about it, but people want to hear about it from you.
Yeah. So I'm thinking back to, I've been involved in a couple wind downs, we'll call it spin downs from these different iPaaS solutions. Um, and I totally get why they got in the situation. It goes back to a little bit of what I talked about maybe 10 minutes ago, which is integrations become more of a priority, but you already have your roadmap and you don't want to displace anything for what seems like we should just have this, right? Like, but nothing's free. And so, leadership or whomever decides, man, it'd be really great if we could like scale up with software as opposed to headcount or whatever. And so that's kind of the trap that you fall into when you sign on, is that it seems great. We can ramp up quickly. They handle a lot of the heavy lifting for us. Um, to get into the messy situation, I think things that I've seen when I come in and we're in that situation, we now have live customer integrations that are, syncing data in production, so that you have to be a little more soft-handed with how you treat those things. And I think one of the core tenets of you might be in a mess is very little documentation about how things work in the current state. Very little comments. There's no repo to go to understand what was built or why. And oftentimes it's like the iPaaS guy. We've talked about this phenomenon of the iPaaS guy. The way that you get up to speed is you talk to the iPaaS guy and you figure out, you get the history lesson, you get a lay of the land. But at the end of the day, it's tribal knowledge. And if the iPaaS guy leaves, you are in a world of pain. Um, so I think that that is definitely one, not necessarily saying there's a fire, but there's definitely smoke if you come in and nobody can really speak to what's going on in what really I consider to be a first class citizen product. Like if you have an integration for a customer, that is a first class citizen product at that point. And so I think another sign that you might be in trouble is, I saw this a lot with different platforms, and that is we're getting a lot of complaints that like data isn't coming over or it's slow, it's not like as fast as we thought it would be, and having trouble tracking down those issues, like having the visibility or having the accountability, because you've now offloaded this to a vendor in a lot of cases, you're beholden to their SLAs and their, fixed schedules. And so you have to then be the bearer of bad news to the customer and kind of say, I don't know when this is necessarily going to be fixed, but we're on top of it. And you're kind of straddling that. Sometimes you can be very transparent about, I'm using a vendor for this, but sometimes you're kind of white labeling it a little bit and acting like, our internal team will get to it, but really it's kind of a support team with this vendor. Um, I think that's there's smoke. It's not necessarily a fire, but oftentimes it is when you're getting a large volume of support cases about the integration not working well and having very little uh, ways to troubleshoot it or get visibility into what's going on.
Yeah, that's like the silent failures, I think, are the worst part. Like one of the worst things is like when you have, 500, 1,000, 10,000, whatever customers running these integrations and you don't know that they're not running until somebody contacts you. And then,
Right.
as we said, lots of dependencies. There's always like something's deauth or like there's Chinese character somewhere, like something. But like one of the very first pages and things that we built at Pandium was built out of this, was getting calls from customers and realizing that an entire partner system had been down and these integrations had been failing for hours, hundreds of customers. And I with the vendor that we used, had no way of knowing. I didn't even have a single pane of glass to like see. I had to like log into each individual account to go check. The only reason we knew
Yeah.
was because our support team was getting pummeled all of a sudden. And, you know, that was actually an instance where it wasn't our vendor's fault and it wasn't our fault. It was the third party had an outage. But if we had been able to see that and proactively reach out, it's not us, it's not you, it's them, like we will let you know on their status page, like when their API is back up, that would have been so much better. It made me feel like kind of a clown to be like finding this out from our customers. And it's just such a simple thing. Like in any other part of your product, you have proactive alerting if there's systemic problems, right? And that
Right.
was like one of the very first things my co-founder and I did at Pandium was build like an overview screen basically. That's like, hey, if you come in here and you see all reds when you sort on whatever the partner is, like that's a problem. And we're going to email you and tell you. Like we don't know why they're all failing necessarily, but we will tell you. And it's obviously gotten a lot better now. And like, we can hook into reporting and all that stuff and alerting. But I think that's like a side effect of a lot of these tools not being built for this level of volume. Like
Yeah.
they're typically built for like an internal ops person, like doing a sync in-house. And in that instance, like, the sales ops and the marketing ops person sees like, oh, we're not getting those records into HubSpot as an example. Like, let me go have a look. It's not 1,000 of your customers that are paying you. And
Right.
yeah, it was just like so painful. So painful when those
It's
things are failing and you don't know.
the last thing you want to do is hear about it from a customer. That's you've hit critical failure mode. And to the tool's credit, there are out of the box sort of monitoring things you can do inside of the tool, but the catch is you're going to pay for it because I believe those steps you would be charged. So it's a bit of a give and take. How much do you want to, how robust do you want to make that monitoring system when you are paying per run step?
Yeah, and
So
it can be very noisy, right? Like especially when you're looking at high volume stuff like this. Like we have customers that are running tens of thousands of discrete connections, right? And if you got an alert, to your point, every time there was like an intermittent auth issue or like a one record didn't sync for some weird reason, you'd be paying and you had to pay for that. You'd be paying $1 billion. And those alerts are no longer useful
it's
because
just
you're just
noise.
getting constant slacks, right? So there is like
Yeah.
that balance of the critical nature of the failure, being able to build in like thresholds like you would with anything else, right? Like if X% of
Mhm.
these are failing suddenly, like we want to see that versus just like
Yep.
every time there's a little blip. And I didn't even think about the fact that in some of those instances, that's like a workflow step that is charged
Sure.
for. It's like a task or whatever.
I think some platforms might have exceptions for those, but I believe I have paid for those in historically, which lends you to go a little bit more of a you cut corners on the
Mhm.
monitoring because you're very task aware and you're not building what you'd really want to be building in terms of a robust infrastructure. You're kind of cutting corners there. So
Yeah, so maybe like because you have some experience, and again, folks that listen to this or have ever heard me or talked to me ever know how I feel about like low code workflow builders. But I'm curious, like what I guess that sounds like one place where maybe you're starting to have to think about alternatives when you're cutting corners around things like alerting, which like most software engineers like want alerting and monitoring. Like what are some of the other places that you've seen maybe not seen an acceleration in velocity or seen have it look really good up front and then have maybe there be some challenges later, and like what have you done to address that in past lives?
yeah, the main one that sticks out to me, and we've talked about this in the past, is this phenomenon of converging on a code block step. So the whole premise of the low code is you can go through kind of this nice GUI, has a nice UI, you can kind of logic out these pieces and put them in place to build this nice workflow. And that works at very small scale, but as you scale up and get more people ingesting this recipe or this workflow, like we've talked about, your costs are going to go up astronomically. And so this this phenomenon that I've seen happen at every place I've worked where we use this tool was how can we get our task usage down? And what we end up doing is we use this low code tool, but we put a code block in because most of them offer these solutions. And then we end up combining what would have been like 5, sometimes like 10 steps in the GUI that each has a step. We parse the table we pull out, we do like some of the data manipulation. We do all that in one code block to keep our steps down. But at that point, we've written custom Python or whatever we're doing. And so you've kind of gone against the whole ethos of the low no code. Um, so it's a funny phenomenon that like we converge on code when we're talking low code. But that is actually one way that we've saved a lot of steps. And actually, some of their solutions consulting even recommend that as part of their refactor if they're auditing your, they have a service you can bring in somebody and ask them, am I doing this the right way? Like, is there a more optimal way to do this? And oftentimes that is one of the solutions they give you. So I just think it's a funny phenomenon that,
Yeah, it's like the folks that are working on staff are like trying to coach you on how to get around the pricing limitations, right? And like at that point, I'm like, this isn't a product problem. Like it's a product. I have my own feelings about the product problem that's leading you to have to do that. But that's a commercial conversation, right? Like that's just like, hey, we chose to price this thing in this way, which these companies totally have the ability to change. But instead, we're going to ask you to do more work that removes the value that we were purporting to offer. And like I've said this on other podcasts, like I think that pricing model is really just like a throwback to when compute was really expensive. Like now,
Mhm.
the compute might be expensive in some of those workflow tools because they're so bloated and like everything takes a long time. But writing code to do ETL is like doesn't like running that code if it's reasonably efficient in like a normal environment is not expensive. Like it's not like
Yeah,
we're doing VMs for everything anymore, and I think that the industry has just continued to price that way because everybody has priced that way, even though it doesn't align with the model that we're discussing, which is where you have customers using these things. They and you should, in my opinion, should not be penalized for using the thing. And, you want people to be efficient.
right.
Like we at Pandium also want people to be efficient. Like we're a code first tool. It's very zippy because of that. But, if you're trying to run a sync to sync 100 records and it's taking 45 minutes, like we're probably going to be like, what are we trying to do here? Because there's something wrong with the way that the code is running. But that's not what you're discussing, right? Like you guys are trying to get like fractions of pennies off because it adds up so quickly. Because they're really, really inexpensive, like on paper.
Right. Like if you can take a 10-step flow to 5, you've cut your per task run in half. So why would we not want to do that? So oftentimes we're like, oh, there's like 4 or 5 maybe superfluous steps that we split out. We could roll it into one with a little bit of code. Um, so it's just interesting, and that kind of breeds that phenomenon of the iPaaS guy because you typically have some semi-technical person who can come in and do that, whether it's an engineer or it's a solutions consultant or somebody who knows their way around code a little bit, enough to be dangerous to come in there, and then they kind of own it. So once you've done that, you now own that thing, and you become the iPaaS guy. So
Sometimes there's more than one iPaaS guy because there's more than one iPaaS. There's
yeah,
companies that have
yeah,
tried like 4 or 5 of them, and now you got a guy for each of them. And
yeah,
those guys are never the guys that work on like the core product and go to stand-ups. Not never, but typically it's like somebody else because the core engineering team like won't go near it with a 10-foot pole. They're like, nope, if
right.
it's not in GitHub, it doesn't exist to be. Like that, you guys built that. That's your monster. Have fun with it. And that's where
Or you get a Yeah, it's so true. Or you get a very disgruntled engineer who has now been volun-told that they're going to be maintaining this. It's not exactly what they want to be doing.
that's fair. That's fair. And there's no code reviews. There's art class. You
Very
can review the
little.
drawing, but not so much
Yeah.
like you're not running your automated tests as an example. Yeah, I have been the iPaaS guy. I have managed the iPaaS guy. It's like I have migrated off of the iPaaS to the new iPaaS. So we have new iPaaS guys. Like
But
it's not.
have you outsourced your iPaaS?
I sure have.
That's the next.
Oh
Okay.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, in my experience,
Uh,
we start with the outsourcing because it's like no one wants to learn this thing.
yeah.
So like you're an expert, you're a certified whatever, you're going to be the person and they're so expensive because it's so specialized. And then you get something back
Yep.
and it's like a canvas with 100,000 shapes that you double click and there's like more shapes and more arrows and then inevitably like, somebody internally has to take it over which is, to your point, that someone is volun-told, that they need to now go and decipher that web that if you printed it out would take up a billboard. And at my last gig where I met my co-founder, that was my co-founder and I. He was volun-told to do it, and here we are. Now we have a whole product. So I guess I should be thankful. Um,
It's giving
um,
one of those what are the pegboards with the string, like the
yeah.
murder. That's kind of like how the iPaaS documentation is. You kind of follow the thread, try to figure out what relates to what.
Well, and it's so wild too, because I've been using these kinds of tools since the early 2000s. They really were born in like the late 90s. I think Informatica maybe was 98. And like, if you look at screenshots, like they look crappier because they were like Windows desktop, but like this, it's the same. Like these shapes and these arrows, and like it really has not evolved very much, even from a UX perspective. Like this, the squares now have rounded corners instead of sharp corners, but like it's really very similar to the way it was. And when we were looking at products and when we ended up founding the company, Sean and I, my co-founder, were really looking at things and being like, if this worked super duper well, there would be like one to rule them all. Because all the tools are like not that dissimilar. So you would think that like if somebody crushed the game with these things, there would be like one that was like the one instead of 100 that are all like good in their own way, but also have very similar, I think, very similar challenges and limitations. But that's just
Yeah,
me with my opinion over here.
I think you're spot on. Yeah.
So without making this into a Pandium commercial, I know we're running up on time, but I did want to ask you one question that I think would be really helpful for the audience. So if you are a
Sure.
PM and you are probably a junior PM and you're being voluntold that you're taking over integrations because that's what happens to junior PMs, and it's the messy thing. Maybe they have an iPaaS, maybe there's some in-house stuff, maybe who knows what's going on, but there's customers running these things. Things are not great. What would you tell them like they should do as their first three things, like walking into this environment?
See what, if any, documentation exists to try to get a lay of the lands. Um, Talk to as many customers who might have live integrations as possible, just to ensure that one, they're happy with what's currently there. And if they're not, that gives you kind of a good path forward. But two, figure out how you can make it even better. So there might be things they're happy with it overall, general sentiment's good, but maybe there are other things that you could be doing. Um, and I think three, and this one probably doesn't get talked about enough, especially from a junior PM perspective, but try to put on your uh, everything's dollars and cents, right? Try to figure out like a big conversation I would have. I've unwound two iPaaS at this point. Um, is could we have built something for similar costs and the maintenance costs are much cheaper in the future? So if you're trying to make a case for whether you should stay on the platform or trying to pitch to leadership about why it makes sense to bring this in-house now and really have the keys, make it about dollars and cents and make it about what's a sensible approach from the maintenance perspective, because I know we've talked about it leading up to this podcast, but we haven't really touched too much on it, is the hidden maintenance cost of continuing to stay on this when you could have built something for a fraction of the price. Like you said, compute is cheap, code hosting's cheap. In the long run, this would have paid dividends a long time ago. Like every day you don't get off is, it's costly. So I think those would be the three things. Try to figure out what's actually going on, documentation, talk to your customers, and um, get more in like the owning your product area in terms of, I have a budget. Does this iPaaS tool fit in my budget constraints for this year? Or would it be better served with maybe an internal hire and some development work, something like that?
I'll also add as a fourth thing, figure out who's going to be on the team with you from an engineering perspective and purchase that person a coffee, a tea, a beer, whatever it is. Become
Yes.
friends. Become
Make
friends with
friends with
this
the iPaaS
person.
guy.
Make friends with the iPaaS guy. If it's not going to be the iPaaS guy, find the new guy or gal, like make friends, because I hope that you're not deep in the trenches, but I feel like Scott, you and I could also do a whole nother episode of this about like migrations and like moving between tools or moving from tools to in-house or
Sure.
sunsetting. And it's like, that is a whole another rigmarole, because unlike just flipping a feature flag or something in your internal tool, you almost certainly have to have your customers do something, almost always. If you're going to migrate
Definitely.
between iPaaS providers or in-house infra or anything, like they're going to have to be involved, if not only to re-auth. And there's a
Yeah,
whole process that I've seen companies do a great job at it, actually, and it's not easy. So maybe that'll be maybe we'll do a blog or something, and you can tell tales from the field, because that is
that
also
would be
every
great.
day you're on it, you're onboarding more customers, which is just another customer you're going to have to offboard at some point.
It's a lot of hurry up and wait. It's a very much a three-legged race, and you don't want to be dragging your customers along for the race. That's not a good feeling, but
No, and you
yeah,
definitely
it's
don't want it to
tricky.
just get cut off, because that's also very bad.
Yeah, also very bad.
Cool. Well, this was such a fun chat. I knew it would be. I could talk to you about this stuff forever. Next time you're in New
Likewise,
York, definitely hit me up. We'll have to grab a coffee.
I will
Any
indeed.
final words for the audience,
Um,
or anything you want to plug?
a plug. If you're a company and you buy stuff, check us out at Arkestro. We're game-changing procurement. But thanks for having me on. It's been a blast. I'll definitely take you up on the coffee.
100%. Thank you so much for joining us and for your candor, Scott. I don't get to talk often to somebody that has strong feelings about iPaaS like I do. It's a glorious day when it does. We're around. We're here. Really appreciate it, audience. If you want to learn more about partnerships, integrations, SaaS, all the things, sassy podcasts, everything, check out pandium.com. We've got tons of resources there. Check out Arkestro so you can hang out with Scott. And
Cool.
I'm sure we will see you all out there. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our content, subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. For more content on tech partnerships, integrations, and APIs, check out our articles, ebooks, and other resources in the description or visit Pandium's website.